Welcome to The Jewish Diasporist, a podcast exploring the political, social, and cultural implications of life in diaspora. We are your hosts, Ben Yanowitz
and Zach Smarin. In this episode, we spoke with Dan Grossman, who served as a student representative on the Board of Deputies of British Jews. The Board of Deputies claims to be a democratic, representative organisation of the community, although to what extent that rings true is a matter of debate. Dan, who publicly resigned over the board's decision to reprimand 36 members, himself included, for speaking out against Israel's war on Gaza, has some opinions of his own.
We discussed his experience as a student involved in Jewish life on campus through Bristol's Jewish Society, or JSOC, and his wider involvement in the Union of Jewish Students, first running and securing a seat as one of their representatives on the Board of Deputies, and later running and failing to secure the votes necessary to become president of the Union of Jewish Students.
Dan's perspective is really valuable to us, as he was physically present at some of the initial events that led to us starting this podcast. For greater context, we encourage you to have a listen to JD episode 2 for our initial retelling of the story of the February 2023 Union of Jewish Students Conference.
We also spoke about Dan's involvement with Na'amod, the rapidly growing British Jewish organization standing against Israeli occupation and apartheid. Dan makes the point that Na'amod has grown beyond a single-issue campaigning organization, which it began as, to fulfill the cultural and communal needs of its membership. This expansion of its scope can certainly generate room for dialogue about the responsibilities and role of political movements.
In keeping with the traditions of the British left, we encourage you to check out the link in the description below. Trust us, there is no malware. No need to contact your lawyers. For a detailed explanation of what the hell I'm talking about, you're going to have to listen to the end of the episode.
As strong believers in intersectionality, we also feel it's important to name that Dan is in fact a ginger. And that does not mean he doesn't have a soul or should be treated as any less than anyone else. We'd like to celebrate the fact that Dan is the first ginger we've had on the show and uplift all of our red-haired comrades. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
Welcome back, everyone. Today, we have a very special guest. Actually, that's probably a little bit unfair to all of our guests. All of our guests are special. But this is a guest who has quite a bit of sentimental value. This is a guest who, in some ways, has been with us from the very beginning. Because the beginning of this podcast for us was our period of organizing within the British and Irish Union of Jewish Students. That's how we started off with the Jewish Future platform. That's how Ben suggested the idea of the podcast to us, and that's what's continued so far with us. Today, we are getting someone who has had a similar trip through this background. So with, starting off from maybe a different place, but now also in a different place, mainly still in Britain. Please, condolences for that person.
Thank you.
Let's start off. Daniel, it's great for you to be with us here today. Could you just start off by introducing yourself?
Well, thank you very much, Zach. And I'm not sure I'd describe myself as a very special guest. You've had some wonderful guests over the past couple of years, so I think to compare myself to any of them would be quite unfair on them. But yeah, I mean, just to introduce myself, I'm Daniel. I would say maybe I'm an activist nowadays on the sort of Jewish left. I'm very involved with Na'amod, the British Jewish group that's against Israeli occupation and apartheid. And I've been on a bit of a political journey, so I very much grew up in the mainstream of the community and have sort of, abandoned the Zionism that I grew up on, in a way. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and I feel like there's no real concise way to talk about it. So that's why I'm sort of being a bit waffly with how I put it, but we'll definitely get into that a bit more.
Let's start off then and start off this journey that you've described. You studied at Bristol, right? Bristol is known as a Junie alongside, and let me see if I haven't forgotten this yet, Nottingham, Leeds, and Birmingham. Right? Those are the 4 Junies in Britain.
Yeah.
Places where there are big Jewish student communities, where there's kosher accommodation, that receive a lot of attention just because of their size. Me and Ben have been to universities which did have Jewish communities, but smaller on the scale. So it's a different experience from us. So what does Jewish student life, what did it look like for you going from your background and moving into that? Was it an easy transition? Like, how would you describe it now?
Well, it was interesting because I feel like in the UK, a lot of British Jews now go to Jewish schools. I went to one of them, a very well-known one in Northwest London. And then you go off to uni, and obviously lots of Jews do go to these so-called unis. So you know lots of people there. Ironically, in my school year, not a lot of people went to Bristol. They mainly went to Birmingham or Leeds or Nottingham, like you say. But even then, it was sort of a very familiar vibe. You knew lots of the people, or you knew of them. So I think walking into Bristol, the JSOC was like the natural place to go. Um, that there weren't any questions about that. So how Jewish life looked there was that you had the JSOC, you had maybe Chabad, you had Aish, you had the chaplaincy. So all I guess quite orthodox, apart from the JSOC, which was a pluralistic and sort of secular environment. Well, secular in practice environment that existed in Bristol.
I wanted to just mention, in case anybody doesn't know, Aish is a Chabad that will take you bowling and give you sushi discounts. Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, good to know.
Or
Good
is
to
that is
know.
that is that an incorrect assessment?
I think that's broadly correct. Lots of freebies.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like fun. I mean, people like Chabad just for an inclusive environment, but of course, this is pretty. I don't want to say aggressively orthodox, but like very much orthodox is the norm, and they kind of ask you to, in that space, at least conform a little bit. Um, the Jewish society, the JSOC, on the other hand, is a little bit different. You say that it's like secular in practice. What was that like? Because JSOC is like the closest thing to what we would do as a Hillel in the United States. Of course, I was involved in the JSOC at the University of York while I was there. It was very small. I mean, we had like maybe 10 people on a Friday night dinner. Um, what was it like at a Junie like this?
I mean, Bristol definitely was one of the biggest JSOCs in the country, and it still is. It's grown in the amount of Jewish students who've gone there, partly due to the hard work of people on committee. So, yeah, we usually get probably, I don't know, 120 people for our freshers Friday night dinner. So that's a lot of Jewish students. I think it's important to consider, though, that many of the Jewish students at Bristol would not necessarily have ever been to a JSOC event or any of these options because,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they just had no interest in it, or maybe they were burnt out from their childhood a bit. So a lot of people do get involved in JSOC, but a lot of people also don't decide to do that. It's quite a big part of Jewish life in Bristol, though, for a lot of Jewish students. Yeah, there is, and there are two communities. So you have an Orthodox community, a modern Orthodox community, I should say, and a progressive community. So it's quite small, but again, it's sort of quite unengaged. So there are a lot more Jews in Bristol that otherwise they don't go to shul necessarily, but they are there, they do exist, and that's very similar on the university campus as well, really.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that seems pretty familiar. I think a lot of people don't really think about the amount of disengaged Jews there are, especially when we're talking about it from an institutional Jewish context. It's like there's actually a lot of people that just, for various reasons, aren't in the synagogue or aren't in the JSOC, and that isn't like they aren't Jews or they don't care about their Jewish identities. It's just not how they're choosing to engage with their time. Before we move forward with the broader institutional Jewish environment, both for students and in Britain, I was curious to take a little step backwards because you grew up in the UK as a Jew, and I'm very curious because it's a much smaller community than the US, at least at a national level. What was your childhood like? What sort of brought your family to the UK, and what was it like to grow up in that Jewish communal environment?
Well, so that is a big question. I think the first thing that you sort of pointed to, which is really important to get out of that, is that the community is very insular. It's very tight knit. Whether you're in London or Manchester, it's sort of all still quite connected. So there are only about 300,000 Jews in the UK or around that. So that's
Mm-hmm.
about 0.5% of the UK's population. So if you think about the amount of Jews in the US, it's a totally different ball game to,
Of
to
course.
New York, for example. So yeah, Northwest London is the biggest part of the community, and then you also have a very sizable community in Manchester, and then sort of pockets elsewhere. But yeah, I think that's the main takeaway. It's very insular. There is a lot of fear in the community of anti-Semitism. You know, Jewish schools have a lot of security. People are genuinely very worried. And that's been the case for many years, really. And in terms of my family, so most of my family came over in the late 20th century. So they lived in the East End, on Brick Lane. They had a very typical story in that sense. So most British Jews are descended from, Jews from Poland or the Pale of Settlement,
Yeah.
really,
You mean the 19th
who came
century?
over.
Like the late
Yeah, yeah.
1800s?
So yeah.
Yeah.
The late 1800s. Sorry, did I say the 20th?
Yeah.
Right, okay, that's my bad. I meant the late 19th century, not the 20th, crucially. Yeah, so my family came over in the sort of 1880s, most of them. And then on my mum's side, my grandma was born in Vienna. Her family were very big in the Viennese coffee house industry. So they owned the Café Herrenhof, which was very big in its day. The Café Josefstadt, if this means anything to anyone in Vienna. Obviously Jack lives there, so
I feel like it should. I'm myself am a little bit limited on my knowledge
yeah.
of very posh
Yeah.
or like traditional coffee houses. I know a
Mhm.
few. Cafe Sperl is my favorite, not too touristy. But yes, a very accultured family of fin de siècle Vienna.
Right, yeah, that was sort of that's what my mum likes to say. So obviously the Anschluss happened and they had all of their property taken away. My grandma lost two of her grandparents, and she had to flee Austria at the age of 2.5 with her parents. So they were very fortunate in getting out, but all in all, 67 members of their family were murdered in the Holocaust. So I think that's something that's very much been drilled into me since an early age, legacy of the Holocaust and that experience in Vienna. So that I grew up with very well. In terms of my sort of religious background, very briefly, I grew up in a Reform synagogue, but I went to modern Orthodox schools, so both primary and secondary, and I feel like that's quite a common thing for British Jews because many are secular, but they go to, let's say, modern Orthodox synagogues or they'll go to modern Orthodox schools, even if they don't necessarily align with that themselves. It's just because it is the logical option.
I feel like at this stage, I would whip out the line, but I always butcher it, which is that most British Jews pray in a language that they don't understand, to a God they don't believe in, for a state in which they don't live. Oh, I got it the first time. There we go. So yeah, interesting thing about saying that's the logical choice. Also about the strength of the reform movement. Now, reform and liberal have unified in Britain, which is an interesting development on of itself. This so you were active for quite some time in got involved in the Jewish student community in Bristol, and then got over there like on the board. And this is something that is shocking to a lot of American listeners because Hillel is a corporation with a product, Jewish culture for students, TM/matrimonial offers, or like the matrimonial pressures. But actually, in most European countries, not Poland, unfortunately, but in most European countries, Jewish student unions are ostensibly democratic, both at the local and the national level. And that gives you at least a theoretical right to get involved with the politics and decision making from a grassroots perspective. And so that's what we did when we tried our best. Ben?
Yeah, I was just going to say that that's actually something that is true more broadly in the UK and Europe because we don't have, and we're going to go into this, we don't have something like the Board of Deputies in the United States. There's no democratically elected body of Jewish leadership that really has any right to claim to represent the Jewish community of the country. And personally, I'm like, maybe that's a good thing. There's no chief rabbi either, which I know is a very common thing in a lot of European countries. But it's very different communal environment from the United States. So actually, maybe we take this moment to talk about what is the layout of the Jewish communal infrastructure, ecosystem, institutions What is the layout of that in the UK? What does that look like? How do the synagogues fit into this wider quote unquote democratic structure? How does the JSOCs fit in? What is, or the schools that you go to, like what does that look like on the ground and from that bird's eye view of the top down?
I think, yeah, it's very important to note that for a community of its size, the British Jewish community has a lot of organizations, it has a lot of charities, a lot of options, I think. Obviously, probably nowhere near the level in the US, but I think the infrastructure there, from what I hear in European, continental European Jewish communities, it's a night and day difference between the UK and elsewhere. Maybe not so true in France, just due to the size of population. I mean, I could sort of go through it all, but we might be here all day. There is sort of this quite tightly knit network of communities. And what I would say is that from modern Orthodox and below, there's a lot of collaboration between organizations. There is a lot of cross communalism that does go on if you are more secular. If you are Haredi and you live in Stamford Hill or parts of Hendon or Golders Green, chances are you're probably not going to have much interaction with these mainstream organizations. So the Stamford Hill community operates very independently, I would say. Obviously, there are lots of different communities within that, different groups of Hasidism, but yeah, I think that's a big dividing line, especially.
I will say that from personal experience, like
Mhm.
every Jewish community likes to say in diaspora that it is small. Even not in diaspora, Israel is just a small country surrounded by 23
Right.
Arab countries or
Yeah.
whatever. Britain has a small
Mhm.
Jewish community, and then Austria will say that it has a small Jewish community because look at Britain, and then Poland in comparison has the smallest Jewish community. But even if you look at Poland, there'll be like North Macedonia, and there'll be people in the Bronx that say that they have a small Jewish community because all the Jews are down in Brooklyn. It's just like, or like,
It's
right,
all
it's very
relative. Yeah.
relative. Like
Yeah.
I've heard people in American towns or cities say that, oh, in my city I don't know that many Jews, and then I Google and I say like, oh, for example, Buffalo, New York, 15,000 Jews, or was it Cleveland, like someplace in Ohio, 60,000. No, St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis, Missouri. I heard someone say that not that many Jews there, and it's 60,000, right? So like that would be like the fourth or fifth biggest Jewish community in Europe. So I feel like some of that stems a little bit from like a insecurity, and in the British context, it's an insecurity based on America. And yeah, like institution wise, yes, this it's interesting because in Britain you see Reform and Orthodox, modern Orthodox collaboration, while in most European countries you'll see modern Orthodox and Haredi collaboration.
I think some of it does occur, but obviously, like you say, I think the Orthodox and Reform collaboration does occur a lot nowadays. It might not have done 10 to 20 years ago, actually. I feel like there has been quite a big shift there, and that's probably partly due to the work of the current chief Rabbi Mervis, because I think he has been more opening.
One of the biggest things that struck me in spending time with the Jewish community in the UK was really just how the hegemonic Judaism, which in the past we've described as Zionist, Ashken normative, and in the US it's largely Reform, but in the UK it's largely Orthodox, which I thought was a very interesting difference because obviously that is going to lead to very different set of institutions. Like you need a much more robust kosher food industry to have that. I don't know why there is that distinction. Maybe reform didn't take off in the same way it did in the United States. And I'm just wondering maybe that has something to do with the fact that this chief rabbi has been building that sort of collaboration between the modern Orthodox and the Reform in order to have like a common hegemonic Judaism. I don't know. I do kind of want to think a little bit about the UJS now because you have, I mean, Zach and I had some experience with the UJS. You probably have more experience with the UJS than us. I was curious what your involvement looked like beyond the JSOC level, and how that evolved over your years involved.
Yes, I think when you get involved in a JSOC in the UK, even if if you go onto a committee, chances are you're going to have an interaction with UJS because you can't really avoid it. They provide a lot of the funding for Friday night dinners. They'll subsidize them, and that goes for lots of different events, which is genuinely really great. So there is a lot of engagement. Also, each JSOC has a UJS sabbatical officer assigned to them. So, I mean, each SAB will have about 10 JSOCs probably, but they're a very important part of Jewish student life, because they are constantly, I guess, helping committees, and yeah, giving them support. The JSOCs are very much part of the UJS's structure. That they're pretty inseparable. Apart from SOAS JSOC, of course, which exists in its own world entirely.
Why is SOAS, which is I don't remember what it stands for, why is this university's JSOC different?
Because it's just basically a JSOC full of anti-Zionist Jews, so therefore the JSOC is anti-Zionist and wants nothing to do with
Yes, it's
UJS.
just completely detached, which is a very interesting situation. School of Oriental and African Studies, a little bit of an older, more antiquated name. And
Yes,
yeah,
a bit controversial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and you were there when we first came to the Union of Jewish Students conference. Was that your first conference, or was that were you already before us?
Yes, that was my first conference, and that's where I did run to be on the board of deputies. I don't know if you remember that. Um,
Yeah, I actually do. I was like, I recognize you. You
mm.
look so familiar. Must have been
Yeah,
from
I'm,
when you
I'm sort of
ran.
hard to miss. I'm ginger, so people don't forget me for better or for worse.
While we do
Um,
not record video for the podcast, we will make sure
mhm.
to make the episode art very orange and red to highlight Dan, just to make
Okay.
sure.
Ginger
Yes, I don't have
representation.
how many
It's
ginger
Yeah,
guests
important.
have
you've
we
read
had on the
about it.
podcast so far? Honestly, we'll have to look
Yeah.
back through it. So anyway, you ran for the board of deputies.
Well,
Yes,
I
yes,
hope
this
I'm
is the
the first.
representation that we really need. It's yes.
Glass ceiling
Yes,
has been
quite
shattered.
so. So,
Yeah.
and the board deputies, as far as I remember, you can run as a student for the board of deputies. There's like it has actually the largest like constituent block. It's like 12 seats or something because the average age on the board of deputies is like 60. So they hope, or 65 or something crazy. So the hope is that by just giving a bunch of votes and seats to the young people, they'll decrease that average age by at least a few years. When you run for it, you stay on it until you stop being a student. So it doesn't matter if you're in your first year of undergrad and then you stay there for 4 years, or you're just wrapping up and you're there for a few months. So when you got on, you had a little bit of time, right? Like, because that was in the beginning of your studies.
Well, I had about 2 years because you start in July, so after the conference. Um, so that I was only on it for two years, and the board's line when I resigned from it, which is the line I would have given, by the way, is that I only had, a couple of months left on my term or whatever it was, because I was graduating university. Which is technically true, but also I was going to rerun with my synagogue, so I said that in my resignation speech. They had a place open, but obviously, after I resigned, I wasn't so keen on coming back so soon after. I was only on there for 2 years, but I did become elected to the international division of the board once I was on there. And that was sort of interesting, sort of not very interesting, because honestly, there is not that much to report on. Um, in terms of the work that goes on, but yeah, I mean, we can definitely get into that sort of stuff after UJS and
Yeah, I mean, I want to name actually what you just said, which is that the Board of Deputies has seats for the UJS, the Union of Jewish Students, but it also has seats for pretty much, it sounds like, every synagogue. Maybe not every synagogue, but all these different synagogues and synagogue movements have seats as well, which I think is very different than it's hard to even imagine in the United States, where you do have synagogues that are affiliated with like the Reform movement, the Conservative movement, or the Orthodox movement, but there's no like bigger structure that synagogues can directly elect representatives to. The only thing we have that even pretends to be like something like that would be the World Zionist Organization, which of course we've done an episode on, and that's
yeah,
not
it
even
was a
that's
good
not what that
episode.
is.
Yeah, like the Conference of Major Jewish American Organizations, I guess exists. Should we? But before we get into the board completely, let's. So you were the representative of UJS on the board of deputies. We can get into like what that looked like on the day-to-day basis. But you ran for UJS president, right? What did that experience look like? Because that's very different from what we tried, and we can outline some of those differences in a moment. But what does the campaign process look like?
I mean, this is such a huge question, and it was sort of a very huge part of my life at the time. I think my friends got completely sick of me basically talking about it every day. Everything that I did was about UJS, and I
It's
think I,
okay, Dan. We'll listen.
yeah, well,
This is
thank
now.
you very much.
This is your
It's a therapy
avenue.
session. I
Yes.
can get it all out there in a long form format.
Yes. Go
Thank God,
ahead. Go
Baruch
nuts.
Hashem.
You
Yeah.
never
Um,
have to say it again after this.
Yeah,
yeah, I
because you
know.
can just
Yeah, I can
because you can
literally
just
just
send them
send
the
people the
podcast.
clip.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it was quite a stressful time of my life, and actually there is a UJS election going on right now, a year on, and it sort of takes you back to a year ago. So that's very interesting to look back on. Yeah, I think my involvement in UJS, it sort of made sense to do it, and I had a reason to in that I wanted to try and do something different, especially politically, because I'm quite a political person. I was broadly on the left of UJS, which, as you both know, was quite small. I mean, the left of UJS is also not comparable to the Jewish left, by the way, just as a
Yeah,
distinction.
we were pretty fringe at the time.
So I remember, so at that first conference that we were all together at, when someone got up and said the word apartheid, I remember I was in shock that they'd gone up and said that. Oh my gosh, they said the apartheid word. Um, but obviously I've been on quite a long journey. So just for some context, I would say that post October 23, I went from a liberal Zionist position where I felt very connected to Israel and very, largely supportive, if not critical of the occupation and whatever, to now really thinking through that and ditching it essentially. And I think that that is both because of the changing global situation, or should I say intensified global situation, making me think about my politics more critically, but it's also a result of doing a history degree at Bristol where I focused on that history using a decolonial lens. And I wrote my dissertation on mandatory Palestine. So I think when people ask me what were the two reasons for your political journey, I think it's both a result of the world situation making me think about it more, and also just reading more, thinking about it more critically as a result of my degree. So, that aside, I decided to run for UJS president because I felt like I had something different to offer. I wanted to try and bring the politics leftward on Israel. I don't have any regrets. I don't regret doing it, but it was not a fun time at all. And look, the election was going to be hard anyway for various reasons. I was up against some very strong opponents. I still managed to get 306 votes, which is probably the most that a left winger ever got. But
How
we
much is
did.
that percentage wise?
I think it was. I think I got 1/6 of the vote. The second place candidate got 2/6, and the winner got 50%.
The comparison, like Judas got 16. Sorry, not no. So you got about 16% of the vote, and Judas, like in 2017, 18, 19, got about 10% of the vote. So that's pretty decent. And also, fun fact: the last year that I was there, so that was the year before Dan ran for election. The election went down to literally one vote. There was 562 to 561 or something completely crazy like that. So yes, poor Josh Cohen, who is now president of the World Union of Jewish Students. So he came up on top.
Yeah, some may say. But yeah, that was a pretty crazy election. But I feel like in our year it was very intense because sort of covert preparation started very quickly. I mean, months ahead of the actual election. So I remember I was trying to ring people up in probably July of that year, with the election not starting until late November officially. So it
Wow.
was a very intense time of like background maneuvering and getting everything ready. And in terms of the strategy, what we were trying to do was essentially win through moderating myself and my politics to then be able to create some change and to do what we could to push UJS leftwards on the issue of Israel. But it wasn't entirely lying, because if I had one, I would have stuck quite close to the platform that I ran on, because I wouldn't have been able to go further.
Do you have platform on hand?
Well, I can tell you briefly. This is really taking me back, but my 3 key points were combating anti-Semitism at its roots, fostering comprehensive Israel engagement, and the third one was something about funding for small and medium JSOCs. I don't know. So, I mean, that was less important to the campaign.
Funny thing about Israel engagement, there is an official email dating from about 2022 in which UJS claims officially, for the record, BDS is not considered a form of Israel engagement by UJS.
It is engaging with Israel.
No, because that's like one of the core tenets of UJS is Israel engagement. And, we love Israel engagement.
Well, so that was the whole point of the phrase. There was a subline in there which was about really delivering critical engagement with the Israeli government. Whatever that means. No, obviously, I think you can see what we were trying to do, and anyone on the left, I think, could see what we were trying to do. I had conversations with people in the Kahillas, and some of them were quite supportive and willing to turn out for me. I mean, we'll never know how many of them actually did, but obviously, I think understandably, a lot of these people were very skeptical. Because it would have been hard to trust me if I was in their position as well. So I get why.
I mean, it's an interesting thing because this is a very different perspective than what we were thinking of. Like, when we talked about our approach to UJS, like, we never considered running for president.
It doesn't help that we're both international students at the time.
Yeah. So for us, it wasn't like a perspective that we were considering. Even if it was just as like being on the campaign trail and getting to get your voice out, it was more like, let's look at the practical policies of what can be done. Let's make super detailed resolutions and like how this, what a practical vision for the future could be, which is a different way of doing. Like, for that, Judas did their own presidential runs, and for them, it was the presidential campaign that got them like on the trail. So it's different perspectives. But I think that one of the questions that, speaking from my experience, that like anti-Zionist or non-to-anti-Zionist Jewish students would have heard for you is like, why engage? Why get involved? And that has less to do, I think, with it has to do with like the radicalism of the politics, but it also is about strategy and vision for the Jewish community. And so we touch on like, why do we even need to think of an organization like UJS? And personally speaking, I feel very strongly about this, because if like approaching it from a perspective of like diasporism or Bundism or whatever, if we want to build a model of Jewish self-determination and remove the idea that Jewish self-determination is intrinsically and practically always going to be attached to like an ethno-state, including for Jews in diaspora all over the world, then the only practical route that exists to change that in our local communities is to have democratically elected and accountable communal institutions wherever we live around the world. And the practical route to that in most places where there are already Jewish established communal institutions is to, at the very least, understand how they work, get involved with, at least within them, to see how they work. You cannot understand an institution just by like standing on the outside in a metaphorical sense. And if you reach a point where, you treat them as a site of struggle and you see that like it's pointless or like you're going to be completely stonewalled, then you can push people and say like, okay, this is not going to work. We need to build something new. But without doing any of that work and like just saying right away, we're not going to try anything at all, it's like, you haven't made the effort. You do not fully understand the institutions in this way. You haven't understand what can fully be accomplished. And so that's why, for me, I think the kind of work, whether it is more like of a resolution strategy or through running for presidency, it is trying in some way. It's pushing those boundaries. It's getting the message out to more people, doing whatever you can in your current position.
Yeah, I was curious from your perspective. You talked to people both inside the UJS and JSOCs, but you also talked to the Kahilas, which, for those that don't know, this is basically insurgent Jewish communities at the university level that are outside of the realm of the UJS. I was curious what I actually don't know the timeline of your election here. One, were you already on the board of deputies at the time? And two, what was the reaction from people as you'd have these conversations? Was there a lot of like very passionate pro-Israel stuff? Was there a lot of confusion? I'm just curious what your finger on the pulse told you about the state of the Jewish community and the students at that time as you ran.
We approached different conversations in a different way, which isn't necessarily lying, but it's about being clever with your messaging, and creating a broad voter coalition. I would say that in terms of the most authentic representation of what I was trying to do, that got communicated to probably, I guess, both the Kahillas and also left-wing Jewish students within JSOCs. So you're talking about the centre left and the left, I think had a pretty good idea of what I was trying to aim for. And then obviously I was trying to be inclusive and bring other people in. So it wasn't a confrontational approach in how I did those politics. And I guess there is a question in what are the merits of that strategy, because ultimately I decided that I'd exhausted that strategy for myself, and now I've joined NAMOD, which is about providing an alternative community, among its other goals, but that is one of them. At the time, it was less, because of the sort of platform and messaging that I was running on, it wasn't as viscerally heated as it became when I was able to say what I liked about my politics, because I definitely did have to moderate myself. So it's a hard one to sort of gauge. And also, the election was fought on lots of issues that were not Israel directly. So it is a bit of a popularity contest, and the most popular candidate won for lots of reasons. So it's not easy to sort of talk about these things in a very clear way.
Yeah, one thing that I do remember, and sorry, before I say that, apart from anything, and this is not just about voting in the election because the voting happens remotely, but actually participating in the conference, is that UJS ships students from all over the country to one location for free. Even if you do not like particularly feel happy about the organization or the general line, it's an opportunity to meet people from all over, like even if it's just like your friends, but you can actually just do it and conspire under their noses, quote unquote. Like there's no forcing you to go to the events if you don't want to, like to the different panels that are happening. At some point, if this were to start happening, they would probably close that loophole from their perspective, probably justifiably so. But I also wanted to touch on one thing, which is that specifically regarding how motions and decisions happen at UJS. We discussed this before, but when the UJS president gets elected, they are democratically elected, but they are surrounded by 6 sabbatical officers who are full-time employees. We mentioned them. Even more so, who are not democratically elected. They are chosen like through a trustee process with the CEO in charge, who is also not elected. And these are the people that are actually responsible for the running of the day-to-day of the organization. While the national council that exists in UJS is just a complete like fig leaf. It doesn't have any sort of power. It cannot like hold the CEO in contempt or give him like a vote of non-confidence or like criticize publicly. It has no powers to like give resolutions. Why are resolutions only voted on once a year? Why can't Jewish students propose resolutions throughout the year for the National Council to decide on?
Well, it's a good question, isn't it?
Right?
Mhm.
Why is there no mechanism for executing motions? That like when we managed to pass one
Yeah.
motion, and then we never heard from it again. So is this like model United Nations? Like we just like
Well,
practicing?
early on, after October the 7th, I remember passing a motion about ensuring that Israel would get aid into Gaza. So it was very, it managed to pass. It was basically asking Israel to act within international law. Now,
That's pretty
how
radical.
will we elect? Well, how will we ever know that anything was done about that? I mean, maybe in statements more recently they sort of touched on that, but also there's no tangible way of proving that that motion has or has not been followed.
Yeah.
Because ultimately the president makes the decisions, for better or
Yeah.
for worse. Yeah.
But then the thing is, that's not democracy. That's window dressing. And the last conference I was at, there was a particularly notorious situation, Dan. You probably remember, like a 25-minute conversation on like about some stupid entrepreneurship resolution, and I was the next in
Oh yeah.
line. Yes, yes, I still have flashbacks from that. These are the kinds of things that also we can appeal to. We can appeal to the perspectives of like democratizing institutions, because these are things that people notice, even more like apolitical leaning people, even people that have disagreements. And I think there's also something powerful about the idea of fighting for democratic decision making, even if you are not necessarily going to be in the majority, right? But you do it for the principle. Like, I think there's something valuable about that. And I think that if you point out a lot of the like terrible ways in which Jewish communal institutions are officially run, you can have members of the community say, well, I think those guys are a bit too radical on Israel, Palestine. Like, I'm not an anti-Zionist, but I think they do a good job on that. I think they made a good critique of that. I subscribe to that. And if people agree on that, then maybe they'll move over on other stuff. Yeah, I feel like we've talked a little bit about UJS.
So I'm curious, then to
Mhm.
transition us, we're talking
Yeah.
about democracy and democratic procedures.
Yeah.
What was it like being a deputy on the board of deputies? Was that very different from your experience at the UJS? Was it similar? Was it democratic? What was that like? What actually is the jurisdiction of the board of deputies?
I think actually both organizations have very similar roles in that both have leaders who represent the organization to the government and stakeholders. So that's why I think for us it was important to try and run that campaign and to become president, because you do actually have a level of influence with important people. Now, in terms of the democracy, I would say that in some ways the board is more democratic. In other ways, it's less democratic. So, for example, you can't really pass motions on policy in the board. It happens very, very rarely. So it's usually made up on the, off the cuff by the executive. But they do meet far more regularly, and there were opportunities to question the president. So I think that was the main process of accountability, and it also happened on various divisions. So whether that was the communities and education division or the international division, which I was on.
How many deputies are on the board of deputies?
I think it's about 300. So just for context then, and this was touching on a point you made earlier, most of those are made up of representatives from synagogues. Importantly, that is from, I guess, liberal and reform to modern Orthodox generally. They have one or two from the Haredi community nowadays. But yeah, by and large, the Haredi community doesn't take part in the board. So that's already one area that is lacking representation. Organizations on the Jewish left, like Narmod, I mean, we don't really have an interest in being involved, hence why I resigned. So
Yeah.
those are two of the biggest glaring issues. But yeah, like we mentioned earlier, it tends to be quite old in terms of um, the deputies on there, quite old and quite male, which goes for lots of organizations.
And of course, one of the things you say about 300, right? If someone asks me a question about how many members are there in the Polish parliament, you won't hear about 400. You'll say 460, right? The thing is that nobody knows how many officially members there are at any given point in the Board of Deputies,
What
right?
the
Because it
fuck?
always fluctuates, right? That's part of the problem. I wanted to cite actually an article that was written, I think, in 2017 or 18 by Joseph Finley, who like did probably the best sort of examination about the Board of Deputies in terms of its procedures. And I wanted to cite this paragraph. Let's imagine a small country. It has elections under a first past the post system with 100 constituencies. In the majority of these, there is only one candidate. Some people have 2 or 3 votes. The size of the electorate and the turnout are never revealed. No one would seriously consider this a democracy, yet this is the system that the Board of Deputies continues to defend. And that's exactly right, because if you're a Jewish student, you can vote to have representatives as UJS, but you also might belong to a synagogue as a student and be able to vote over there, right? And
Yeah,
most of
yeah.
the like,
And other organizations, it's not just synagogues, but a lot of Jewish charities and organizations like the Jewish labor movement will have representatives. So people can be part of these different things. Yeah.
yeah, what would make sense is an organization to which there were geographical constituencies, like London gets a certain amount of deputies, Manchester, Leeds, and so on. That's another thing, of course. The example that I always remember hearing is that Leeds, with 5,000 Jews, gets 3 deputies, and Hull, with 50 Jews, gets 3 deputies. So that's like rotten boroughs shit from the 1830s in the British parliamentary system that we learn about in year 9.
Speaking of that, when was the Board of Deputies founded? I think this is actually something that goes
It's
back
older than the
to
United States.
1761, I think. Something
yeah,
like that.
like when
And
Yeah.
you bring up this metaphor of rotten boroughs that the British Parliament was known for before it reformed in the 1800s, but I don't know if that's a metaphor. I think that might just literally be the system they're using.
yeah.
That's what it
And
sounds
so
like.
And it doesn't account for obviously lots of Jews who are not part of these organizations or synagogues, whether that's left or right or secular Israeli. These people are not accounted. So obviously it's got lots of issues with representation. I think anyone can agree with that.
Yeah. What role does it play within the British Jewish community? Does it simply serve as like a mouthpiece to the government? Does it actually provide programming? Does it work to integrate institutions? What role does it play?
It's a good question because I think it depends on who you ask. Because a lot of people don't really care about the Board of Deputies. They care about the organizations that are part of the board. And obviously, if you're on the left, you're not going to like the board. If you're on the right, as in the sort of far right, you're not going to like the board.
there was
Um,
actually a split group, the National Jewish
yes,
Assembly, right?
indeed.
Going back to your own choice to run and then get elected, what was
Hmm.
driving you to get involved in the Board of Deputies?
I think it was something that just felt right to do because as a Jewish student, I felt that it was a good place to try and represent my views, which at the time I'd say were broadly centre left. And yeah, I think at that point we saw it as a good place to organise on, as a sort of broadly progressive quote unquote bloc.
When was the first time that you considered resigning? Like, how was that it wasn't a process that like you did on the spot, right?
Well, it wasn't overnight, and I think I'd definitely been having doubts about it, especially going into 2025 after the UJS campaign, because for me it felt like, what's the point in organising within these institutions anymore? I basically don't agree with them ideologically because I'm very much not a Zionist. And yeah, it got me asking lots of questions. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to stick it out for a few more months. And I decided to do that in about December 2024. So I decided, yeah, like I might as well see what I can achieve while still being on there. But really the trigger point for resigning was after this Financial Times letter, which was a very big story at the time, where a group of progressives on the board wrote this letter into Financial Times, a letter which I signed, by the way, and it was met with a very authoritarian response, with the board not being happy that the letter, they said that the letter claimed to speak on behalf of the board, which the signatories argued that it didn't, and it was a bit of a messy situation, which we don't need to go into the specifics of, but basically I would argue that the board didn't want to tolerate dissent on the issue of Israel, especially coming from its deputies. And by the way, this letter was very moderately worded. I think it says out of love for Israel, which I felt uncomfortable with. And I know someone else didn't want to sign it because it said that, but I felt, it's a means to an end. And it became a big story. And in the end, the board actually suspended the 5 individuals who went on the media to talk about it. I had resigned by then, but it was, I think for me, that was the trigger point because it showed to me, well, they're not going to tolerate even the most mild of criticism in public. Because it's all well and good saying that they tolerate this criticism in plenaries behind closed doors, but what does that actually mean if no one hears about it and you're not going to impact your decision making as a result?
Yeah, I think that this is an important point to make because I'm all for, especially in smaller communities, the thing that like you see in Krakow in Poland, I would say, is that a lot of institutions like hate each other, or have beef, and or don't cooperate for no reasons, or like they duplicate their works, and this is damaging to the community at an institutional level because resources are not shared and so on. And so the point is that divides on stupid things are stupid. Divides on important things are important. And so the idea that a minority voice, because it is a minority voice, at least within institutional Jewish life, cannot express itself because it somehow damages this mythical idea as if all Jews will come to the same conclusion about a contentious political subject. It's ridiculous. I would say it's damaging, like, to the perception of Jews by the outside public, as if like we all agree with what one community just says. Like there is this like magical Jewish interest that everybody can objectively agree on, and it's treating like Jews as these like magical creatures, right? What is the British national interest? Can we get everybody objectively agreeing on that? Would we tolerate
Empire.
dissent? Okay, empire, right? But what is the Polish perspective? What is the Austrian perspective? What is the American perspective that everybody agrees on in America, right? But when we talk about, I guess because it's a smaller community, right? What is the Jewish communal interest in Britain that we cannot dissent from? And like, God forbid that non-Jews find out that Jews argue among each other.
Well, I
Right.
think this is a very crucial point, actually. I think a lot of people are quite willing to tolerate criticism of Israel behind closed doors, especially if it's sort of moderated. But as soon as it goes public, a lot of people are very on edge about that. And you might say, it's because of this genuine fear of anti-Semitism. That's why they feel so strongly about it. But I remember that, yeah, at the time of my resignation from the board, a lot of people were not happy with me because I went public about it. That's what they didn't like. They did not like that it was in the mainstream media and that it was getting coverage because it undermines this illusion of unity, which I don't think exists in the community anymore, and increasingly doesn't exist as you see greater numbers of Jews becoming anti-Zionist explicitly, and that's shown in lots of reports like the JPR surveys, for example.
Yeah. But even like, because anti-Zionist is a strong
Yeah.
label, it's a strong break with the mainstream
Yeah.
community. There was a big story a few months ago with the head of the Jewish community in Austria. Oscar Deutsch gave this like really, really awful interview, like basically like the most right-wing, like pro-Israeli government positions. And like this was perceived to be like in the name of the Jewish community, and there were lots of people like, and these were like centrists. Like there were some right wingers, like they were to the right of him. They were like, this interview is going to cause more anti-Semitism because he's just acting like a clown. Right. So like there is of course like an increased radicalization and like on the left and like leaving the community. We're nearing to the end over here of the time that we have. I wanted to hear a bit more about Na'amod and like the role of like the Jewish left as it comes into the institution, and particularly I'm interested, and I also might want to challenge that a little bit because I remember when Na'amod came around, and Na'amod, like to my understanding, like worked as this like a pressure, like a campaign group on a specific issue, right? Which at the time was framed as opposition to the occupation. Now it's been at like apartheid. Na'amod is comfortable with using the word genocide, but Na'amod was not originally, as far as I understand, perceived to be a alternative community, right? So I understand like why that is happening to like people involved in the movement, but there's also like there's stuff to be discussed around it, like what the strategy and how people include within community institutions. So I would like to hear more about.
I'd like to add just one little piece of the, like basically I'm curious about your political journey towards Na'amod
Yeah.
and other organizations like that.
Okay, so I think just to tackle your point first, Zach, I think this is a question that we often ask ourselves within the movement. Obviously, on the left, we're very reflective. We like to be self-critical and look at both what's gone well and what's not gone so well. But I think it's important to consider that the movement grew a lot, especially post October 23. yeah, it just in terms of size, like a lot more people join the movement. Now we estimate it to be around, 900 active members strong, which is actually quite sizable for the British Jewish community, and that's not mentioning the people who follow us on social media or on the mailing list. So I think that the movement grew significantly, and that definitely has impacted the strategy and what the organization does. And I think that what's so important about Narmod is that it sits at the intersection between the mainstream Jewish community and the wider pro-Palestine movement. So it provides people a safe space to enter the pro-Palestine movement if they haven't really been part of that before. So I think that's where the value lies, and I think the logical extension of that is that it is an alternative community space in many ways. We do lots of community focused events, lots of cultural events. So even though it started off as this single issue campaign group, it actually has outgrown that because you've got lots of people in the movement focusing on different things.
Could
Mhm.
you give us some examples of those like community and cultural events that
So Narmod every year will run Seder nights or Purim parties or Hanukkah parties, educational lectures, book launches, you name it, they've probably done it. So it's definitely gone beyond just campaigning on Israeli policy. So and Ben, in terms of your point and my political journey, I mean, we sort of touched on it a bit, but yeah, I guess for me, after the UJS election, that was a point where I reflected strategically and thought, okay, I don't really ideologically align with what the mainstream community is putting out anymore. I would quite like to join a group that broadly shares my politics, and that I could contribute to. So yeah, then it was just a process of like easing myself into it and then officially joining a few months later. But I think that was sort of the natural conclusion. But yeah, I think the main point is that my shift in politics did not happen overnight. It wasn't like suddenly I woke up one day and decided, oh, I'm an anti-Zionist now. It really did take a long period of gradually moving leftward, unthinking and relearning what I'd been told as a child in the environment that I was brought up in, which was yeah, sort of in the mainstream Zionist perspective or consensus. So yeah, it was just a very gradual process of learning more and challenging what I believed already.
what would you say as we are closing out on the hour for people that might be in an earlier stage of this trip of yours? I mean, there's always going to be younger Jewish people. On the last episode, that this is what we spoke about. We spoke about education and the fact that a lot of these movements that do exist, or groups, I think now more like, because of its size, because of its strength, classifies itself as a movement, rather than just like a group of people coming together. So a lot, even like some of the stronger movements, we speak about it in the context of America and JVP. There isn't much of it like youth organizing, right? There aren't Jewish schools of this kind that are. There's one that we just discussed, but it's not something that has much institutional strength or focus right now on the Jewish left. So if that's something that there's work on in Britain, or could be work done to continue, that would be great. But what's more realistic in the near to mid future is like 16, 17, 18-year olds going into universities, going into JSOCs, perhaps, being throughout, like having grown up in a tight-knit Jewish community and wanting to escape beyond that. What would your experience, what would you want to tell them? Perhaps maybe what would you want to tell yourself, your, I don't know, 16, 17-year-old self?
I think the key point is about open-mindedness. And if you're not willing to be challenged on your views, you're never going to change. And I found that in interactions with people after all of this sort of came out in the open. But yeah, I think it really is this willingness to be challenged, to engage in the conversation in good faith, and to really challenge what you've grown up on. Like, why should I feel afraid when I see a Palestinian flag in the street? And that's ultimately what I felt when I was 17, 18, being willing to challenge that and have conversations with other people and read things that challenge my politics was very important. But it's not just about listening, it's also really trying to internalize, because if you don't open yourself up to shifting your political opinions, it's just never going to happen. So that's the key point. And I think it is such a sensitive issue. Post my resignation on the board and being more outspoken about the issue, a lot of people that I've grown up with really cannot stand me or my politics now, and it has affected relationships. So it isn't nice, and I understand why people want to almost be in the comfort of what they grew up in. It is easier in many ways to stay within that bubble, to believe what you always have. But I think that it's important for people to know that there is an alternative community that they can be welcomed into. There are lots of other Jews who've been on similar journeys. So yeah, it has, it's been a process that's involved lots of good and also lots of bad. There isn't really a definitive answer.
That's it from me. Ben, would you like to add anything else or ask a final question?
I mean, I think there's a lot we could talk about here. Obviously,
Yeah.
the left in the UK is kind of a mess right now. And the British Jewish left in particular is, I don't know actually what's going on with it. But is there any updates you'd like to give us on the state of the left and the Jewish left in the UK at this point? Where do you see things headed?
Well, we're in a very interesting position. You've got the Labour Party not polling well at all at the moment, and you're seeing Zach Polansky's Green Party capitalise on that, as well as the sort of mess that was the launch of your party, which we won't get into for everyone's sake. But what I would say is that no matter what space you are in on the left, we all need to pull in the same direction, because we are facing the threat of a reform government led by Nigel Farage. That is a very real concern, and we have to be ready for it. So we've got to put our differences aside. And yeah, like I say, no matter what space or party you are organising in, if you are committed to left-wing politics, if you are committed to socialism, if you are committed to justice and equality in Palestine, we all need to be on a similar page if we want to take down the far right. So yeah, I think it's about doing whatever we can in the space that you're in. And I know that's a very vague and unhelpful answer, but it really just depends on who you are, to try and contribute what you can at the moment.
I wouldn't call that vague or unhelpful. I think with an audience that's as international as this one is, I think that's helpful as hell. I mean, we're all in different places, all in different organizations, but we do need to recognize that we have a common enemy. And that's true in our own national contexts, and that's true at a global level. And we need to be pulling things together in this moment and recognizing that either we're all going to win or we're all going to lose.
And on that note, there will be a link in the description that will allow you to sign up to my party, which will also be your party. It will be redirecting to the Jewish diaspora's Patreon. Just don't worry. My lawyers told me that it is safe. Don't listen to Ben. Ben will tell you that it is a lie. But
I hear that they're already having disagreements about this party.
Yes.
But unlike some, we'll keep it behind closed doors.
No. Only listen to me. Do not listen to Ben. The link is real. And yes, give us all of your money, please. Thank you very much, Dan. It's been a pleasure. And yes, we will hopefully be good luck on all of the campaigning going forward.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. It's really been a pleasure, and yeah, we could have spoken about so much, but it's good to have the conversation. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Daniel. It was great to meet you.
We are beautiful people. Though our hearts are broken, we sing for justice and wholeness.
audio is going to be still coming from my computer audio, making sure that that's the case for you. It's not the case for you. Now it should be, just change that.